Good evening, Tigard-Tualatin middle school families. Welcome to our webinar tonight, where we have the chance to share with you some really specific details about what school is going to look like here as we year of the 2021 school year. My name is Tim Gross. I'm the principal at Hazelbrook Middle School, and I welcome you to our session here this evening. Just a couple of nuts and bolts items as we get started tonight. First of all, we know that you're probably coming with lots of questions, and we hope to get all of those answered in our presentation tonight. But as things come to mind, we will have moderators live in the question and answer or Q&A button here on your screen. If you have a question that comes up and would like to click on that, then you can go ahead and ask your question, and our associate principals from each of our schools will be responding to those questions as best we can in real time. If you're having issues with anything in terms of accessing Zoom or having technical issues, you can go ahead and enter that in the chat button there, and we'll have some technical folks that have that expertise that can reach out to you and will be able to help with that. Third is, if you prefer to hear a Spanish translation of our presentation, I'm aspiring as a Spanish speaker myself, and so we will have interpretation available by clicking the interpretation button on the bottom right portion of your screen. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa here so she can give a little bit of an instruction in Spanish.
Hola, buenas noches familias y bienvenidos a todos. Ahorita, si necesitas ayuda o si quieres escuchar todo la presentación en español, simplemente toca o haga clic en el globo o círculo abajo de interpretation en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Y también, si quiere escribir preguntas, también haga clic en el Q&A abajo en la parte inferior de la pantalla y puede escribir sus preguntas y alguien va a responder en español. También tenemos una opción de chat, y la opción de chat simplemente le va a usar si necesita ayuda con ayuda técnico, ayuda con Zoom. Ponga sus preguntas ahí, alguien le va a ayudar.
Thank you, Lisa. Next slide, please. So again, I want to welcome you in case you're joining us just a couple minutes late. My name is Tim Gross. I'm the principal at Hazelbrook Middle School here in Tualatin. And tonight you'll also be hearing from Andrew Curl, who's the principal at Tualatin Middle School, and Andy Van Fleet, who is the principal at Fowler. And moderating our Q&A will be Ben Burkhart, associate principal at Hazelbrook, Gwen Stover, the associate principal at Tualatin, and Marnie Watts, the associate principal at Fowler. So we welcome you, and we're really glad you took time out of your busy evening to join us. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here is what we are hoping to share with you tonight over the next hour or so. First of all, we want to talk about a little bit of the evolution of the scheduling process for the coming year. We're going to walk you through in detail tonight what it's going to look like to go through the middle school experience, whether you choose the hybrid option or the 100% online option. We want to make sure that you have some clarity on what the schedule looks like, as well as some of the rationale behind that. And we're also hoping to answer as many questions as you have or as we can possibly handle through that Q&A. So we're hoping tonight you can walk away with a little more detail and a little better sense of what it's going to look like to reopen our schools here in the fall. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew from Tualatin to talk about the folks that have helped us develop this plan we're going to share tonight.
All right, thank you, Tim. So yeah, I just wanted to share really quickly a little bit just about our process. We started as a team in the spring as we went towards the closure and comprehensive distance learning. And as we finished that process, we did a lot of reflecting and reached out to a lot of stakeholders and met with a lot of teachers throughout the summer who gave up their time and a lot of hours to put this plan together. And we wanted as much perspective as possible. So we had a group of core teachers that were with us from the beginning to help us through this process. We also had some separate intentional meetings with just elective teachers to figure out how we could provide robust programming to students, knowing that we were going to have 100% or a hybrid option. The next slide. We also knew that we needed to have some really intentional support for our special education students and our ELD students. And so we had separate meetings where we included folks there. We also had a reading teacher, representatives from counseling, instructional assistants, as well as teachers on special assignments who are tasked with helping us with our instruction and instructional technology needs. Next, please. In addition to that, we had administrators who spent a lot of hours working together in settings kind of like the one you're experiencing tonight, where we have a lot of meetings to discuss what to do and how to interpret the guidance from ODE, as well as representation from our teacher membership. So just want to thank the people who gave up all these hours to get us where we are and where we're going next. So thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Curl. So clearly a lot of work has gone into getting to this place, vetting multiple platforms, instructional ideas, going through a lot of different filters, and all with the intent of creating consistency for our students, consistency for our parents, consistency for our staff. In the spring, we got really used to, in the elementary level, Seesaw, Google Hangouts, Google Classroom. Here at the middle school and at the high school, a couple different platforms parents and kids had to navigate. Two new terms for us are going to be Canvas, which is a learning management system that all TTSD schools will be using this year. That kind of takes the place of the Google Classroom, and Florida Virtual. The Florida Virtual School curriculum will be adopted for 6 through 8, and it will actually be adopted across the district. And for most of our core programs, there will be already a curriculum there to support teachers and support learning. For electives, and with the ability to augment these pre-created classes and lessons, there's a lot of versatility for instructors to take a look at what lesson is being pushed out, where is it weak, where do students need more support, how do I upload that and support them. But it's all going to be in a one-stop shop, which is going to reduce some anxiety once we all learn the new system, because it truly is very versatile, and it will be connected, and parents will be able to support students both in the elementary as well as here at the middle school by going through Canvas and our Florida Virtual platform. A brilliant aspect that we lacked last year, the Canvas allows a very robust multilingual interface, which allows great support for our bilingual families, for our Spanish-speaking families. There's definitely a focus on the language there, but outside of English and Spanish, there's additional multilingual support, and that is something that we're really thrilled to be able to access and offer and be able to support our students and community with. In addition, there were complications that we felt last year, and we heard that from parents, from staff, and students. Within Florida Virtual and within Canvas, our parents are specialists for English language support for our students with specific IEP needs. Our adults in the building are going to be able to hop into those classes, support our learners, see where they are in the progressions, and that is the exact same thing that will be happening on the home front. Parents will very easily be able to get in, see where their students are in their progressions, and very transparently be able to support them or ask questions as well. So for a lot of reasons, we're feeling like we're in a pretty good place here. Obviously, there will be a learning curve, but Canvas and Florida Virtual will work really well together. And with that, I think we can advance the slide and pass this back to Mr. Curl.
All right, thank you, Andy. So a couple things. Tim Gross from Hazelbrook is going to kind of walk us through what the schedule is going to look like for next year. But I just wanted to speak a little bit to how we arrived here. We know that there's been several community meetings about this plan that's helped shape where we are today. We also sent out a survey in the spring and collected a lot of feedback from families, and also just some listening from students and their experience in the spring. So a couple of things that came out from our feedback was, a lot of folks rightly acknowledge that our teachers and our staff were working really hard to support kids in a way they've never done before. So I think we all recognize that people were working to do the best they could under a really hard situation. But that being said, there were some things that we knew we could improve upon if we were entering this space in the fall. So some of the things that we heard were, my child needs a consistent schedule to follow. The workload is different from teacher to teacher. That my child needs a daily check-in to stay on track. My child needs a letter grade. Too many teachers and too many classes to keep track of. My child needs more direct instruction and interaction with the teacher to be successful, and that it would be nice if attendance was taken. So there's a lot of information that came out of those sessions, but a lot of those things were in our minds as we crafted the academic and portion of our plan that you're going to hear about tonight. Next slide, please. So the other component of that is the health and safety measurements that came out from Oregon Department of Education, as well as the CDC, about how to keep kids safe at school. So our hybrid plan is designed to keep in mind a lot of the factors that we knew we had to consider when we created what are called cohorts, which is smaller groups of 15 to 20 students that have minimized interactions with other cohorts. So we have to be really mindful of how to maintain social distancing, to do screening upon arrival, to do contact tracing once kids move throughout our campus, to have hand washing routines, to have only essential staff on campus without visitors, requiring facial coverings, and having specific entry and exit routes to minimize contact with external cohorts, plus thinking about transportation and some of these other things. A lot of that went into our thinking on how to, if we're able to meet the metrics, bring kids back safely. So as you're seeing our plan tonight, and when kids would be on campus for an in-person learning, if the metrics are met, you can see all the considerations that we had to think about as we crafted our plan. Next slide, please.
So as we transition into talking about what a school day is going to look like for students, the root and foundation behind this plan is the requirement from the Oregon Department of Education, where our target is to have 2.5 hours per day, or 2 hours, 30 minutes per day of teacher facilitated learning with students. And so as we get into details of the schedule here in the next slide, just know that that's the backbone of this model, is that even though we're going to be starting the first 9 weeks of school in a remote setting, we're still aiming for that 2.5 hours of time that is teacher led. As we know in the spring, when we let middle school students especially design their own days, things don't always work out the best. So we'll have a structure that students can follow, whether they're in the hybrid and we're back at school once it's safe to do so, or whether we're in a remote situation where students are learning from home. Next slide, please. So I know that all of you are tasked with making a decision in the next, let's see here, 18 hours or so, if I do the math right, that by noon tomorrow, we're going to need to know whether you want your child or children coming to school in a hybrid versus 100% online model. And I know there's been some significant confusion about the differences in those models. And so before we hop into those scheduling details, I want to make sure that I provide a little bit of clarification around the questions that we're fielding the most around the differences between those two models. First of all, I want to make it very clear that for the first 9 weeks, all of our students will be learning remotely and our teachers will be teaching remotely. And so therefore, there is little to no difference in terms of what the schedule will look like for students in a hybrid or 100% online model for the first 9 weeks. Once the governor's metrics are met for being safe to return to school, then we're looking at students opting for a hybrid. We'll spend 2 days a week in school, combined with 3 days a week of remote learning from home. Students that choose the 100% online version will remain learning at home all 5 days during the week. In terms of who are students interacting with, we know a huge part of learning at middle school is that social interaction. And in a hybrid model, teachers from the neighborhood school, so in Tualatin, Hazelbrook teachers would be facilitating and working through interactive and engaging lessons with students that are also from Tualatin in their neighborhood school. In a 100% online version, then that would be facilitated by a TTSD teacher or one from the school district and with students in TTSD, but there's no guarantee those are students from their home school or their neighborhood school. And so we're hoping to match that up as best as we can so that students can be with students from their own community and same with teachers from their neighborhood school. But as you make your selections here before noon tomorrow, the numbers of students selecting each option will dictate a little bit how we put that together. In terms of a schedule, both models will follow a structured daily schedule that's led by a teacher. Previously, there was a proposal that the 100% online option was going to be student-led. And I think at this point, based on feedback from the first couple of community sessions, there will be teachers leading and facilitating to provide activities at appropriate rate and level for students in each of these models. The primary difference in these two is that when it's safe to return, students in the hybrid would return in person, whereas 100% online would remain home. Class offerings will be the same. All students will have a morning meeting. All students will have language arts, social studies, math, science, an elective, and PE. In addition to students that qualify for advanced math or reading support or are English learners, all of those options will be provided regardless of the model between hybrid and 100% online. In addition, students on 504 plans or IEPs will also have their services and needs met in both models. Next slide, please. So here's where we get into a little bit of a tricky diagram, but I want to make sure that we're able to articulate exactly what a week of school looks like for students. And so for the first 9 weeks, regardless of the model students choose, I want to walk through what a weekly schedule would look like. Now, as Andrew mentioned a little bit earlier, students will be cohorted in groups of 15 to 20 students. Students with the last names A through L would meet with their core teachers in person in the hybrid or with the core teachers online on Monday and Tuesday if their last name is A through L. Wednesday is set aside as a cleaning day in our facilities and for planning and collaboration for teachers. So outside of a brief check-in to set aside or create agendas for students to work on during the day, neither of the cohorts, whether it's A through L last name or M through Z, will come to school on Wednesdays. Then Thursday and Friday, last names A through L would be home, engaging in class sessions at home. And if students' last name N through Z, that would flip-flop and they would have their core classes on those days. Just to walk you through what a typical day in the life of a student is going to look like over the first 9 weeks, every student will start the morning at 9 o'clock with a morning meeting. That will be led by a core teacher that's teaching their first core class. And those morning meetings on Monday will focus on building social emotional skills that we know students need to learn. One aspect of the spring that we know we missed was the social interaction and the building of community that's really difficult to do in a virtual setting. And so we're setting aside time to be really, really intentional about building those social emotional skills and building the citizenship skills and creating a community that's really welcoming for all of our students. Along with that, we know we have some needs to build an anti-racist and anti-bias community. And so we're developing those lessons as we speak to get ready for our students so we can create that really welcoming community for all of our students. On Tuesday, students will engage in interactive and engaging activities with that same core teacher, and they will focus instead on academic skills, what it takes to be a really successful student in an online environment, in a virtual environment, in remote learning. And so therefore, that would be what it looks like to create an electronic organization system, how to keep track of an agenda and know when assignments are due and how to keep track of that on your iPad. We'll also be developing and sharing lessons around what it looks like to meet expectations for interacting in an online forum such as this, where everyone can speak and share and collaborate. And so we'll have to be really intentional with teaching those skills. On a Wednesday morning, there would be, like I said before, just a really quick check-in with students to make sure that they have a plan ready for this day ahead where they're not going to be interacting with teachers as much during an interactive session. Again, back to Monday again and Tuesday, if your last name is A through L, following those morning meetings, there would be a 15-minute break. And then from 10:15 to 11:15, there would be time allotted with a first core teacher, in the case of this example, with a math and science teacher. Students will have 2 core teachers, one math science teacher and one language arts social studies teacher. That is intended to make sure that we minimize the number of teachers that students are exposed to in a given day. Feedback from the spring was that having 7 or 8 teachers during the day was just too many to try to follow along with. And so therefore we've developed this model so that students really only need to follow along with 2 core teachers in addition to their elective PE and support classes. So after that 1 hour of time where there's interactive and engaging sessions with the teacher and also maybe some independent work that students do over the course of that hour, not all of it will be interactive with the teacher, but a chunk of it will. Students will have an hour and a half of time to have lunch and to move around. We know that spending consecutive hours in front of a screen, as I'm sure all of us have done a lot recently, can be really difficult and challenging. And I'm trying to imagine an 11 through 14-year-old student being able to stay in front of a screen all day that's not video games. And so we want to embed that hour and a half of time for students to have lunch and then to get outside and move around or to move around indoors if the weather's not great. Then coming back at 12:45, students would engage with their other core teacher in language arts or social studies. And after that, their interactive and scheduled day would be complete at 1:45. Following at 2 o'clock, all of our teachers will be available with check-in periods or office hours where students can join and ask questions, where students can check in and get help, where they can join in small groups and gatherings so that students can go to the teacher that they need to get any sort of support they want. That could be with math, science, language arts, social studies, or their elective PE or reading or advanced math classes. So those times in the afternoon are intended to create a lot of flexibility for students and for teachers. After that, at 2:45, that would be the end of the formal schedule or agenda for students. And then they would have some things to finish up and maybe work on at home through Canvas and Florida Virtual, as Andy talked about earlier. Students, as I said before, would have a brief check-in Wednesday, and then they would spend the day Wednesday working on independent work and practicing and applying the skills from their classes. And then on Thursday and Friday, they would be completely virtual, whether hybrid or 100% online. I'm not sure if I clarified, but in those core classes, if it was safe to return in the hybrid model, students would come to school for those core classes. Regardless of the model, electives, PE, advanced math check-ins, reading classes, and work with learning specialists will all be virtual throughout the entire school year. And the reason we landed on that decision is because if we are to give students choice and allow for electives and opportunities for that, there's no way to minimize the number of cohorts that we need to keep things safe and to keep from students interacting with hundreds of other students in the school without really limiting that time at school. So because of the small sizes of the cohorts and the need to really minimize the number of cohorts that students are a part of, electives, PE, and support classes will be remote and virtual all year long. You'll also see on the screen here that students have one elective. I'm sure there are questions about how that will be forecasted and what that would look like. We intentionally forecasted students to rank their choices for electives, and we will be doing our best to give students the number one choice. But we know that some of our electives won't be available because of the schedule that we're offering. And so we're going to do the best we can to get students the classes that they chose. Next slide, please. And so again, just to clarify, because I know folks are making choices very soon about which schooling option they wish to enroll their students in. Again, the differences between the hybrid and the 100% online are that students that select the hybrid will return to school in person 2 days per week. A through L will come for their core classes on Monday and Tuesday. Last names N through Z will come to school for their core classes on Thursday and Friday. The scheduling structure for both models will remain very similar. So in a hybrid, if we are to come back in person, the times of the day may fluctuate a little bit. The start and end times to classes may be a little different than in the model I just showed you. But the structure will remain the same number of courses, same offerings each day. PE electives and support classes will all be virtual, regardless of if we transition to a hybrid and come to school in person. 100% online option, if students are to select that, then they will remain in the schedule and the structure I just shared with you for the remainder of the entire school year. There wouldn't be any adjustments or changes to anything once it was safe to return to school. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and he's going to walk you a little bit through what those classes would look like.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of break down what a class might look like and kind of go through some sample schedules. These are just examples of how a teacher might structure this time. But as you'll see, it'll look a little bit, or quite a bit different than what you experienced in phase 3 in the spring. So what you're seeing on the slide now is a day in the life of a student and what a core morning meeting will look like. So morning meeting will be from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock on those core days that Tim just discussed. And so what you might experience is a morning circle structure where kids will have a chance to check in. One of the things that we've heard in our feedback and that we know is true for middle school students is that they have a chance to build relationships with one another and with their teacher. And so what we're going to be working on in our professional development with teachers, as well as with students, is how to really build community in those spaces. And so that will be a component of what they will experience during that time. In addition to that, this is a place where students will receive direct instruction on social emotional learning, anti-racism and no place for hate, intentional lessons around expectations and how to learn online, and then might be followed by a closing. And again, this is a time and space for students to really connect and to get to know their teachers. And again, these students will be working with a smaller number of teachers, which will hopefully really enhance their ability to make those connections in the fall. Next slide, please. So this slide is an example of what an ELA social studies block might look like. For cohort A1, and that would be from 10:15 to 11:15. And as Tim sort of mentioned, every student will have a really consistent schedule, so they'll know at what point in the day they need to be on their computer to really engage with these interactive lessons. So an example might be a mini lesson on a core concept from Florida virtual content. It could be a class discussion. It might be a chance to have small group breakout discussions. And maybe mapping out the expectations for the week and assess student progress. So this might look different each day depending on the lesson and the concept being taught. But one of the things that I mentioned earlier when we heard the feedback is that students really wanted some interactive, engaging content with their instructor. And that's what we're hoping to provide in the fall. Next slide, please. And finally, there's going to be the office hours that Tim talked about at the end of the school day. So this can look a lot of different ways. It could be a place where a teacher invites a small group of students for a check-in on a key concept, or maybe there's a really big essay that's due. It's a chance to get one-on-one support for an upcoming assignment or project. It's a place to get additional support from a geometry instructor or a tag coordinator. And it's a place really just for students to get the individualized support they need outside of the windows that were named in the rest of the schedule. All right, next slide, please. I'm going to pass it back over to Tim.
So as we move into some frequently asked questions and start to target the rest of this presentation to things that we think are on your mind, I took a quick look at the question and answer forum, and I think many of those questions we're going to answer for you here in just a moment. But again, we really need your a decision about which option of schooling you would like by 12 o'clock tomorrow. And, if you are having difficulty logging into ParentView and accessing the registration that it takes to make that decision in ParentView, feel free to reach out via email to our head secretaries at each of our schools, and we will go ahead and enter that information for you so that we can document the option that you would like. We know that we're up against the time window here and the deadline, and we don't want that difficulty with logging into ParentView to create any additional stress. So feel free to access our websites for each of our schools and send a quick message to either our registrar or our head secretary, and we can go ahead and enter that information for you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and we're going to walk through some questions that we're hearing quite a bit about so that we can hopefully answer them for you.
All right, thank you, Tim. So I'm going to kind of play the role of a parent here. A lot of Tim, Andy, and I have all received some really thoughtful emails from families. There's a lot of questions that came up that had some common themes. So I'm going to sort of play the role of a parent here and ask Andy and Tim some questions, and hopefully they can elaborate on some of the things that people are asking about. So the first question is for Andy Van Fleet, and the question is, how will cohorts of students be constructed?
Well, thanks for the question. I want to also tell Tim Gross, thank you very much, because he did such a brilliant job of explaining the A days and the B days. All of our cohorts will be created by grade level. The core classes, math, science, English, social studies, will be about 15 to 20 students per class. Electives will be higher because, as indicated, the electives and PE will be done virtually all year. So there's not the same concern around spacing and space needs. So we can have a larger class there. But to be able to pivot from virtual back into the building when those metrics are hit, we need to have 35 square foot of space per kid. And that works out to 15 or 20 students per class. So we'll have those cohorts, those that have the core with our alpha, A through L, will be coming on the Monday and Tuesday to get that experience once we hit that hybrid mark. And then our families with alpha M through Z would be coming in for their core work on that Thursday and Friday. All of our cohorts will be heterogeneously mixed, which is a diverse ability level. So it'll be a blend of ELD, special education, TAG, identified students, all placed in the cohorts as equitably as we possibly can. And like I said, with few exceptions that are out there, we will have that alpha breakdown A through L that would be coming into the building in that hybrid scenario on Monday and Tuesday, and M through Z on Thursday and Friday.
All right, thank you, Andy. And the thing I would add is that if a student has different last names in the same household, there's a process that we'll be able to switch those cohorts to align for family needs. All right, well, the next question, if we can go to the next slide, is how many teachers and how many students will be interacting in each of our instructional models? And I'm going to pass it over to Tim.
Yeah, so as I spoke to before, students will be scheduled, and Andy just talked about this, students will be scheduled in cohorts of 15 to 20 and will remain within that cohort throughout the day. So we know for safety's sake and to minimize exposure to large groups that we need to keep students really contained to that cohort of 15 to 20. In terms of teachers, as I stated earlier, those cohorts of students would see 2 core teachers and potentially 1 elective teacher and 1 PE teacher. And then if they have additional support for advanced math or reading or English language development, or they see a learning specialist for some individual help or support to help them with their learning, then they would see an additional teacher. So teachers will see 4 to 5 teachers. This is a lot different than we've had in the past where students have seen 7 to 8. So we've really reduced the number of contacts there so we can really focus on our teachers and students getting to know each other and really develop those connections that will be difficult as it is in remote learning, but even more so if there are 7 or 8 teachers to navigate.
All right, thank you, Tim. And if you're typing some questions into the chat, remember that the Q&A is where we're going to be responding directly to the questions. So the next slide, please. So the next question, my child forecasted for multiple electives. How will electives be scheduled? Andy, can you take that?
Absolutely. So when students forecasted in the spring, they were asked to rank multiple elective choices. And we will do our absolute best to look at the forecasted selections and place students in the electives with priority of their first choice, especially as staffing and our course allocations allow. Our goal is always for kids to have the first choice, but in this environment, there are some electives such as pottery where we can't expect students to have clay at home, and we unfortunately won't be able to offer those selections. So we'll continue to go down that forecasted list and try to match up your child with one of their top offerings. And again, as Tim referenced earlier, we will have one PE class and one elective in order to create a more manageable number of classes in the virtual environment.
All right, thank you, Andy. Go to the next one, please. So Tim, how will we meet student needs for TAG, ELD, 504, reading and special education?
So thanks for the question, Andrew. Ultimately, there are two ways that we'll do this. One is that on days where students don't experience the core, there is a class time there where we can really work to serve students with what they need. If they need a Read 180 class to support their reading or a System 44 class to support their reading, we have created time in that non-core day for students to access a specialist to support them in those programs. If students are English language learners, they will have access to specialists during those time windows as well as access to specialists potentially in their core classes as well. In terms of TAG, we will be working to really differentiate within the core for language arts, social studies, and science. Having a Florida virtual online platform will allow students to do a little bit of self-pacing, either in the hybrid or the 100% online model. And so there will be an opportunity for students to move at different rates within that, even though it's teacher structured and interactive. Also with TAG in terms of math, we'll have advanced math programs. And while students will have a core math class that is working with students of all abilities, they will also have a time during those non-core days and during their afternoon check-in periods to be able to drop in with an advanced math teacher who can provide direct instruction around the advanced math. So in terms of students that have a 504 plan, we will continue to make those accommodations as are relevant to those 504 plans in a virtual setting. It's our job to make sure we meet all kids where they are and get them what they need to be able to access learning. And the same goes for students that have disabilities and qualify for special education. So that could be that there are special afternoon meetings that are scheduled with our learning specialist to jump into with small groups to help with organization, to provide additional reading, writing, math support, in addition to a time window on a non-core day where we have a class period where we could provide that as well. So each of those options will be individualized for students as we continue to build cohorts and we develop our schedule following the enrollment choice that you're making by tomorrow.
All right, thank you, Tim. If we can go to the next question, please. So what will my students' math experience look like if they're in advanced math?
All right, so Tim did a great job, actually started touching on this question in his previous answer. All of our students will be in their cohorts, and so the math science cohort, for example, within that, there is a differentiation that's already allowed. Students will be placed in their proper progression within the Florida virtual math courses. So it's totally possible that as they're in, whether it's in the hybrid or at home, they will be working on a different set of math problems because they're working at a different level. So they'll have an adult that's with them, whether it's in the hybrid or via online, that's supporting them with their math questions. But the differentiation is in there are different assignments and different progressions because I might be in a math 6 or a math 7 or a geometry even. All of those students could be in the same class, yet still working on different math assignments. So in addition to that opportunity and that support, at the end of each school day, there's that window that we talked about earlier, where we're going to have advanced math teachers that can provide additional support if questions are coming up that we can't answer on the spot during that allotted time earlier. So a couple different varieties and different ways to be able to meet the differentiated needs of our math learners.
All right, thank you, Andy. Go to the next slide, please. So how will sixth graders be identified for advanced math?
That's a great question, Andrew. I think this is a difficult one because normally we rely on student information and progress assessments from the previous spring to make a decision about what the best fit is for students as they come to each of our middle schools as sixth graders. Because of the conclusion of our previous school year in distance learning and the lack of our ability to collect that assessment information, we will be collecting information about student ability here as we start the school year in sixth grade math. So all students will be enrolled for the beginning of the school year in sixth grade math, and we will work in a bunch of assessments to sort of develop or understand students' levels and their skills. And we will use that information by the late part of September to move students into the advanced course as they qualify or are fit in the Florida virtual program. And as I said before, once that transition happens, students that are in that advanced track will not have their schedule adjusted or changed, but they will have access to an advanced math teacher during their elective PE days and their afternoon check-in times with teachers to be able to get specific advanced math instruction as needed. So ultimately what it comes down to is we will be doing a series of assessments coming up during the month of September. Once we get to know students a little bit better and have that information, we'll be able to determine the best fit for math course for our sixth graders.
All right, thanks, Tim. And next question, please. So what if my child is in a Spanish immersion program?
All right, I'll field this one. Both Hazelbrook and Fowler have two-way immersion programs. These will operate in a similar schedule way as our English-only programs. Students will have core cohorts and receive approximately 50% of their instruction in Spanish still. At the sixth grade, students will receive Spanish instruction in language arts, social studies, and mathematics. At seventh grade, we're looking at science, social studies, and language arts. And at eighth grade, we're looking at science and language arts. Morning meeting sessions will also be led primarily in Spanish, and students may receive instruction in Spanish from a different set of core teachers than they would receive instruction in English from.
And
Right.
Andrew, if I can jump in and just add a little bit there.
Sure.
I know at Hazelbrook, as our sixth graders in our two-way immersion program move into seventh grade, I want to express to parents here in our audience that we have identified very highly qualified and skilled teachers to be with our seventh graders to teach Spanish language arts and Spanish social studies and Spanish science. In addition, those students will have opportunities to access an English language arts program and an English math program, all as part of the core instruction. And this is a priority for us as a school district at Fowler and Hazelbrook to continue to build biliteracy and bilingual skills for all of our students that are in our two-way immersion program. And we'll be hosting an evening next Wednesday night, a week from tonight, where we can walk through some more details specifically about what our two-way immersion programs will look like for the coming year. But I want to make sure that all of our families know that this continues to be a priority. We have our staff lined up and can't wait to introduce you to them as we begin the upcoming school year.
All right, thank you, Tim. If we go to the next question, please. So now that we know how the fall is going to operate, how much homework will my child have?
Yeah, the way I think about this question is it's going to be a little bit different than I think we're used to handling homework. We usually think of homework as you go to school during the day, and when you get home, you do your homework. I think now that students are going to be home all day long, we can consider almost everything they do to be homework technically. But I think what's going to happen is that students in their live and engaging sessions with teachers, interactive and engaging sessions with teachers, will have access to do things interactively with their classmates. Then when it comes to assignments that they need to complete, assessments, those things will happen independently via the Florida Virtual and Canvas platforms. So students will have things that they need to complete, and there is time embedded both before and after school on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday set aside primarily as practice and applied learning days where students can work independently to complete those assignments. We would expect that students will not necessarily work completely within the confines of our daily schedule, but that there will be additional things to complete. But teachers for each of our courses will be creating assignments and due dates and deadlines just as if we were in school in person. And so you can expect that, unlike the spring, teachers will be assigning things as makes sense as part of their scope and sequence of instruction and the learning progression, versus receiving all assignments, for example, on a Monday and having all of those due at a set date. This will operate much more like a regular school day, as we received a lot of feedback from parents that didn't work very well last spring.
So Tim, as a follow-up, can you explain a little bit about the role of a core teacher and how they'll help move students through the Florida virtual content?
Absolutely. Our core teachers will take on the role as experts to really look at the Florida virtual curriculum and find the things that align the most to the essential learning standards for each of our content areas. So for example, in math, our 7th grade math teachers, for example, will have access to a 7th grade math curriculum through Florida Virtual, and they will be finding the activities, the lessons, and the modules that really help support students with developing the most essential Common Core standards from 7th grade math. In addition, as they keep track of student learning and have meetings with students in interactive sessions, they'll have an opportunity to see where students are, and they'll have an opportunity to build new things and add them to the Florida virtual curriculum that may help students better master those standards. So teachers get the opportunity to kind of look at student learning and advance and flow with that in a really natural way that they would normally do. They just won't be designing all of the lessons and content on their own from a textbook as we traditionally would. They'll be using that Florida virtual content as a backbone, and then providing the activities and lessons that they need to help students really dive into it, collaborate around it, work in small groups, talk to each other about it, and really problem solve to master that learning. So teachers will come alongside students as facilitators that have access to the learning virtually through Florida Virtual on their own. And instead of providing, a lot of 30 to 40 minute direct instruction, our teachers will instead have the opportunity to really facilitate conversation, assess where students are, and provide that supplemental support that they need to access those standards.
Yeah, and thank you, Tim. And the thing I would add is that students are going to have 3 basically blocks of time where they're going to be online working interactively with the teacher, and they have a long lunch break in the middle of the day. And part of the reason for that is to accommodate students who need to travel to access a school lunch on those days, and it gives students a chance to stretch their legs as well, and an opportunity to work on some of the things that Tim just named. So next question, please. So can families select the hybrid option and choose to learn from home when it is safe to return to school in person?
All right, I'll field that question. When we created the system, this hybrid schedule, we had the lens the entire time of what is the best way we can set this up to bring our students back into the classroom. I wish we could all be in that environment that was non-pandemic, where we had 100% of our kids in school. Unfortunately, this is what we're facing right now, and so we're going to work through it together. And we have worked very, very hard to create a system to allow choice. If we want to be coming back in and feel that it will be safe enough when those metrics are met, we have this hybrid opportunity to flip back and pivot back into our classrooms. We totally respect and understand some families are looking at those metrics and thinking it's still not safe enough to send my child back in, which is why the online only option exists. For us to try to forecast for both of those needs is incredibly, incredibly complicated. which is why it's really important that we accurately assess, at least for our semester one here, whether or not we want to be a part of that cohort that will come back in when the metrics allow us, or whether we want to stay home. Because trying to make that alteration mid-year is going to be incredibly complicated, and we've done is best to our ability of trying to get to a place where we can balance our cohorts to support our children and your children the way that we need to. So again, it's really important that we need to forecast for these selections, because we'll be in those for the remainder of the semester.
All right, thank you, Andy. And so just again, it's going to be, when you make the selection, it is going to be for an 18-week commitment. And then there'll be an opportunity to make a different selection after the first semester. All right, next slide, please.
So as we get to the conclusion of our presentation here tonight, just to highlight a few things that are upcoming, and some are listed here, and I'm also recognizing there are other things that are not listed here that I want to make sure that we share with you tonight. The first is that we've mentioned it multiple times. We really need your selection between hybrid or 100% online by noon tomorrow, and that can be done through ParentView. Excuse me, if you're having difficulty accessing ParentView, an email to our secretaries, our head secretaries at each of our schools can help get you signed up for that. Second, and just before I move on, just want to elaborate or reiterate what Andrew just said, that the selection you're making is for the first 18 weeks of the coming school year, the first semester. It is not a full year commitment. So we all know that for the first 9 weeks, we'll all be virtual. So you're really making that decision about that second 9 weeks or second quarter of our school year. Should it be safe to return to school? Following that, as we continue to go through August, the week of August 24th, I know that I communicated to Hazelbrook families that we are going to do iPad pickups for new students and sixth grade students the week of August 31st. We have moved that timeline back to the week of August 24th. You will be receiving communication from each of our schools, hopefully by the end of this week, that shares with you what that information will look like in terms of coming and picking up an iPad from us. We will also be hosting school individual sessions like this at each of our schools the week of August 24th. We hope to operate those in more of a town hall type of format where we can answer your questions and take questions from the chat or from the Q&A today that we're unable to answer, and potentially prepare to answer those for you the week of August 24th. In addition, Hazelbrook and Fowler will be hosting a week from tonight an information night about our two-way immersion programs and what those look like in this model moving forward for next year. As you make those selections for our two-way immersion programs, please know that school will operate almost in the same way, whether it's 100% online or the hybrid option for our two-way immersion programs, and that cohorting will be done within those TWE programs. The difference being some students will come back to school and others will remain online, but the instruction will look nearly identical for those models, as will the cohorting because of the size of our two-way immersion programs. Coming up the week of August 31st, our teachers will be returning from their summer break, and we will start to do some formal things to welcome all of you. And you will see some informational videos and opportunities to get more information about Canvas and more information about our morning meetings, as well as some opportunities to get you oriented to our teachers and more about our schedule. And so that will be coming up the week of August 31st. The first day for students will be September the 14th. And we really look forward to seeing students in that interactive and engaging setting coming up on the first day. We will have lots of orientation and training for students and families to go through ahead of time. So there's some preparation to do that. And then a really important part of our middle school experience is our affinity groups and the ability for our MECHA and Black Student Union and Pacific Islander and our Pride clubs to really get together and to connect with each other across our schools and within our schools. And so we will be scheduling those meetings as they fit in here coming up after the start of the school year. Next slide, please. As we conclude here tonight, I just want to direct you to our frequently asked questions that are available on our TTSD school website. We'll be updating those as often as we possibly can. You'll also be able to see videos of tonight's meeting, should you want to go back and revisit those. We'll also be posting a transcript of the Q&A that came in from tonight so that you can revisit those questions anytime you wish. We want to work to get all of your questions answered, and know that in these large group forum and a webinar, that can be sometimes difficult to do. So coming up, as I said, the week of the 24th, we'll have some individual school meetings where we'll be available to answer more of your questions, but we also want to make sure that we can get those addressed here on our frequently asked questions website. Next slide, please. So as we conclude, I just want to thank you for joining us tonight. We hope that we've answered some of your questions and provided some clarity to what the school year is going to look like. As I said when I opened, we really appreciate your patience and your grace and flexibility as we continue to pave new roads into the future. None of us had anticipated the place where we are, and we really look forward to providing a really great educational experience for all of you and for our students moving forward, even in this unanticipated situation. So thanks for joining us tonight. We will continue to stay here in the Q&A session for just a few more minutes to try to get those questions answered as much as we possibly can. But we appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your evening.